Okay. I put the reading space thread in the Jumbotron, and then I also put the PDF. Y'all might hear some background noise because I just pulled over to get the reading out the way for the hours. So let me pull up the PDF real quick. I'm glad y'all all can make it, and I hope y'all doing okay. Yo, there's so much shit happening in the world, and I know everyone is overwhelmed. I just hope that y'all are keeping your mental intact and, you know, doing some form of self-care because this is some wild shit we're witnessing. Give me a couple seconds so I can pull up this PDF. Boom, got it. All right, so I'm gonna pick back up from the chapter Black Power and Bourgeois Black Nationalism. So I'm gonna just jump all the way in it. Okay, thus Harlem Core was pioneering and formulating a strategy for the rise of Black capitalism. Let me get some water. I'm already stuttering. It's been a long day. It's still not over. In the field of education, Harlem Core reported that in March it had launched its demand for Black control of the schools in Harlem by proposing the creation of an independent board of education for Harlem, selected and completely controlled by and responsible to the Black people of Harlem. According to the proposal, integration had failed, and the only way to achieve quality education for Harlem's youngsters was through community control of its school. Harlem Core set up a committee for autonomous Harlem School District and began organizing support for the proposal. Interestingly, the following November, McGeorge Bundy recommended that New York City's school system be decentralized into 30 to 60 semi-autonomous local districts. Bundy had been named head of a special committee on decentralization at the end of April after the state legislature directed Mayor Lindsay to submit a decentralization plan by December 1st if the city were to qualify for more state aid. Lindsay, an astute political liberal, insisted that decentralization was not merely an administrative or budgetary device, but a means to advance the quality of education for all our children and a method of ensuring community participation in achieving that goal. Bundy's proposal would allow for not one, but possibly several school boards for Harlem. Harlem's core school board committee therefore found itself in the position of being on the same side as the New York Times in giving critical support to the Bundy plan. While both the New York City Board of Education and the United Federation of Teachers opposed it. Bundy and the Times saw that decentralization could be modified and applied in a manner that would not seriously change the overall functioning of the education system, while the U of T was so blindly engrossed in immediate problems that it failed to realize that its long-term interests lay neither with the school board nor in the course proposed by Bundy. Tension between teachers and Black parents had risen as a result of a 3-week teacher strike that fall. The teachers thought parents were attempting to usurp their professional rights and privileges. The parents, on the other hand, attacked the teachers as racist and the destroyers of their children. Bundy was well aware of this and escalating tensions when his report, Reconnection for Learning, was being written. But he also knew that the teachers had in their union an established mechanism for channeling their discontent. The parents had no such channel, and there was always the danger that their anger, having no institutionalized outlet, might escalate into violence. Hence, it was an urgent necessity for the parents in some way to be reconnected to the schools if disruptive conflict were to be avoided. The mechanism for accomplishing this end appeared to be limited school decentralization, which would allow some parent participation, thereby mitigating dangerous clashes, while at the same time precluding genuine community control of the schools by masking central control under a facade. So basically what he's describing happened here is, parents in the Black community were seeing how their children were not only being miseducated, but there was a lot of reports in that time and now of a lot of abuses. And of course, under a system of white supremacy in these schools, their goal is to, cut off the wings of children, to break them and help them to conform. So by the time they get to an age where they've been under the school system for, most of their lives, they'll go into the world fully able to be assimilated into the system, hopefully squashed up all rebellious activity, or at least being able to be controlled if they are semi-rebellious. We'll read more about the school systems too and the way they function under, a colonial project. But yeah, so basically he's saying that parents witness in the result, because anytime you do this break, when you break the mind, you have to force it not to resist. It's going to come out and manifest in certain ways in the community. And of course, the people are going to push back against that, which happened. So to kind of pacify them, to get them not to, have more control over what is getting taught to their kids or demand more accountability for also the abuses their kids were facing in these schools, they basically gave them a facade of power. Say, yeah, we'll create these boards that you can participate in, but you won't have any say. So it don't matter what decision you come on these boards, that's just for show. The real decisions will still be made by the same white people in power. So that's what he's talking about. A year later, in October 1968, when the New York City school system was in the throes of yet another crisis, Bundy would go so far as to play the role of self-appointed spokesman for the militant parents. This is why I'm for a collective response and I don't do leaders. But let me keep reading. Damn. He charged that the teachers and staff professionals were more to blame for the crisis than the reform-minded parents and community forces. Oh, never mind. Let me shut the hell up. It is deeply puzzling to me, he lamented, how those professionals who are concerned with the future welfare of the teaching staff can be successful if they remain in a state of warfare with those Black and Puerto Ricans whose children make up more than half of the enrollment of the schools. The effect of Bundy's statement was to further reduce the possibility of any alliance between teachers and parents against the school board and city government by driving in further the wedge between two former groups. Okay, I see what's happening here. So this guy Bundy made himself the spokesperson on behalf of parents, made it sound militant in language, but what the result was is that two groups that could have came together to actually formed an alliance that would have, benefited the community as a whole. Instead, he became a wedge against them so that those two groups can't merge and then take account or, hold accountable the school board and the school system. Instead, they'll be fighting each other, which is teachers who are being exploited, overworked, classrooms packed. And of course, these are Black teachers too. I think at the time in 67, the majority were crackers, but there are some Black teachers in that area too. But teachers in general will say overworked, underpaid, classrooms overpacked. And then you have you have also too, those same teachers usually live in that neighborhood. So again, they're dealing with the same issues that their students are and the parents are. But again, this chapter is showing how Black bourgeois leadership, as well as just aspiring bourgeois people, how they function and operate when their goals are not for liberation, but for assimilation and upward mobility. So yeah, he served as a wedge between the parents and the teachers so that they couldn't form an alliance in which they would hold the school system accountable. So it benefited the system and not the people. The effect of Bundy's statement was to further reduce the possibility of any alliance between teachers and parents against the school board and city government by driving in further the wedge between the two groups. The militant reformers in the Black community were led to believe that their real friends were found among the corporate elite rather than among white professionals and teachers. Regardless of the respective merits of the parents and teachers' mutual suspicions, Bundy's move could only increase these hostilities, and it amounted to a splitting tactic. Basically, divide and conquer. Core's Oakland meeting was shaken briefly by a rebellion of descendant nationalists who thought that the strategy of separate community institutions was too limited in scope. The nationalists wanted Core to endorse complete separation of Blacks from white America. They sought to have the organization improve the idea of a separate Black state. They also wanted Core to exclude white members. On this latter point, a compromise was reached, and the convention agreed to strike the word multiracial from the section of the organization's constitution that describes its membership. White liberals loudly decried this compromise. The New York Times, for example, lamented editorially that white co-strugglers have been given a clear message that they will be relegated to second-class citizenship within the organization. Oh my. When I say crackers be so fucking dramatic, all they said is that Black folks, we want to do for ourselves. This community, this issues are impacting us the most. This is a Black ass community, so we're gonna have a Black ass organization. And no one said you can't do the work on your own, right? And that's the thing. this fake ass allyship shit, I'm about to go the fuck off. But the fake allyship, you can always spot those who don't really have the interest of the people in mind because they need to be the face or they have to be constantly praised. Like, why would you praise someone for doing like the bare minimum? Like, the bare minimum is to recognize that injustices are happening and that you should do something about it. No one should give you a standing ovation or a cookie, and you damn sure shouldn't be invited to a motherfucking cookout. But here we go. They literally just take the word multiracial out, and these crackers are talking about second-class citizenship. I swear to God, get out of here. Oh my God. To put it bluntly, CORE's membership now stands for racial inequality. Oh my God. Because they won't let y'all be the face of a black ass group. Like, white people just be wanting to control everything. CORE, however, was no longer attuned to this traditional white liberal view of the meaning of racial equality. In the second half of the 60s, having a quota of white members was no longer required to legitimize a Black freedom organization, and neither was white membership necessary to ensure that a Black organization conformed to the desires of white society. Oh, that's a word right there. Hold on, let me make sure I'm reading that right. CORE, however, was no longer attuned to this traditional white liberal view of the meaning of racial equality. The second half of the 60s, having a quota of white members was no longer required to legitimize a Black freedom organization, and neither was white membership necessary to ensure that a Black organization conformed to the desires of white society. That part is where I needed to read again, because basically it's saying, to me, Kwame Nkrumah described this as well, the next stage of like imperialism and neocolonialism, where you no longer need the descendants of the alabaster demons to be on that position of overseer. You can now have the colonized oversee itself and still have the results benefit the state. That's very, very important to like recognize. So even if the group is all Black, even if the language is militant as fuck, if the actions don't result in the immediate liberation of the people, and again, that doesn't stand on its own. The liberation is directly tied to dismantling the system that is oppressing you. Both cannot exist in the same realm. So if it's not directly involved in dismantling this global system of oppression, not just in your neighborhood, but globally, well, guess what? So yeah, that's really important. I'm glad he pointed that out. Indirect control, and neither was white membership necessary to ensure that a Black organization conformed to the desires of white society. Indirect control and manipulation of the Black liberation movement was the hallmark of the new liberalism, which even went so far as to endorse Black power and Black separatism, not to mention Black capitalism, as a means of sidetracking Black revolution. Wake it the fuck up, okay? And that's, again, I'm really hoping that as we read these works, that we tie it to our present. Like, don't like just taking these words and like, oh, they're just describing what happened back then. Yes, but also too, I can see direct parallels on how this is still happening today, and also how they modified it so that it can keep working in today. So the pragmatic thrust of the CORE convention was outlined a few weeks later by McKissick. As the occasion of his remarks, McKissick denounced the statement condemning riots issued by Martin Luther King, A. Philip Randolph, Roy Wilkins, and Whitney Young. Their statement approved violent repression of the riots and said in part, killing, arson, looting are criminal acts and should be dealt with as such. Equally guilty are those who incite, provoke, and call specifically for such actions. There is no injustice which justifies the present destruction by rioters of retaliating troopers of the Negro community. So what I just read was this joint statement put out by Martin Luther King, A. Philip Randolph, Roy Wilkins, and Whitney Young. And basically, the problem I have with this statement is because anytime there is resistance, anytime there is uprising, no matter where you find it within the world, if it's on behalf of the colonized people, when a leader or when any leaders or any kind of figurehead or famous person, if their first like statement or any statement goes to like condemning the oppressed in the way that they protest or the way that they resist, I say throw that person away. I know that sounds hard. That sounds so fucking harsh, but it's so fucking necessary to know how to navigate these things, because to me, it's like if you can sit and live in this world and view and watch and be affected by all of the heinous shit that is happening due to systems of oppressions being existing and also being like imposed upon a people, If you can exist in that peace and calmly, but only clutch your pearls when the people try to overthrow that and try to implement a system of justice, of creating systems of restorative justice, and that's when you clutch your pearls, well, I already know who you're for. Like, how can you be so comfortable under violent, oppressive, repressive, omnicidal fascism? How can you go to sleep at night with that? But then when there's resistance in the air, when the fires are burning down embassies that act as agents of the state, when people are being genocided all across the globe for white capital and the advancement of white imperialism, like, how can you sit back and then clutch your pearls when people are actually trying to like resist that? So yeah, it is a tactic, and y'all have heard the term wet blanket before. And that's what these act as. When all of a sudden we need to tell the rioters how to act. Now they should be criminal. I was talking with a brother, and after this, I'll keep reading, my bad, y'all. But I was talking with a brother locked up, 21 years old, right? He just got transferred to a new prison. And we were talking yesterday about Palestine. He wanted to know what was going on because they only have access to the news. So, of course, they're hearing how Israel's the Holy Land and they're trying to like defend themselves by blowing up hospitals and killing kids. You know, all of that propaganda bullshit, right? So we were talking, and basically I was telling him that, you know, in a system where, you know, in a system of white supremacy and capitalism, there is no such thing as justice. Therefore, the state, which has the power to deem whomever they see fit as criminal, we as people, as oppressed people, should not even go by that definition or that standard. Because how can a system that genocided indigenous peoples all across the world, enslaved Africans, continue to exploit Africans, erect a system of a prison industrial complex to continue to exploit mostly Africans and exploit their labor and the abuses that sustain behind bars, and in the way where they crush rebellion, you know, especially after George Jackson, they want to make sure that none of these people serve any kind of risk where they will go out and want to destroy the system that enslaved them for that long and stole their years from them, all because of some arbitrary rules to oppress poor people and shit. But that system is criminal. So it has no moral standing to deem any of us criminal. So therefore, we have to understand when we look at people in prison that we should never, ever go by that talking point of who's criminal, who deserves to be punished. That system cannot stand in an unjust system. So any leader, you know, just willy-nilly throwing around that word criminal, especially to describe people resisting their oppression, you got a side eye. McKissick replied that history would record the ghetto explosions that summer as the beginning of the Black Revolution and as rebellions against repression and exploitation. In a tactfully worded statement, McKissick accused the four civil rights leaders of opportunism. We believe that it is unfortunate that our brothers felt it necessary to condemn Black men, Black people, period, but you know how they be, for rebelling against that which oppresses, that they found it opportune to decry the violence of the victim. It is fruitless to condemn without offering solutions, and it can only force Black people to question those who condemn. Basically, I should have just kept on reading. We wouldn't have the violence if someone hadn't made some mistakes, said the Corps leader. He then went on to outline Corps' program for correcting these mistakes. Some of his specific proposals sounded remarkably like Harlem Corps had recommended. It goes, Black people seek to control the education system, the political economic system, and the administration of their own communities. Ownership of the land area in places such as Harlem must be transferred to the residents of Harlem, individually and collectively. Existing governmental programs such as the Demonstration Cities Program, the Federal Housing Authority, the Commerce Department programs, along with contributions from private industry, must be coordinated to accomplish this end. Ownership of businesses in the ghetto must be transferred to Black people either individually or collectively. I know I said I was going to keep reading y'all, but real quick. So earlier in this chapter, they pointed out that you don't have to have white faces anymore in organizations in order to still help the white settler colonial state. Like for that organizations to still work on behalf of that end game of white hegemony, right? That's important because even if a group like demands like, okay, we want Black people to control these institutions. Well, if those Black people have been trained in a white supremacist school system, if those Black people have been heavily propagandized at all hours of the day, which we all are, if there has not been any kind of like decolonial process in which we dismantle the ways in which capitalism shapes the way we view and interact with the world, the way white supremacy shapes the way we view and interact with the world and each other, well, guess what? You can put that person who has not been, you radicalized for liberation. If you put a person who's not radicalized for liberation in a position of like, of own or controlling that institution or even a group of people, you will literally just create the same effects over and over as though it was a cracker doing it. So that's really important, because just seeing black faces in high places or in any place is not a sign of liberation, not at this stage of neocolonialism. We have to remember that. These paragraphs suggest certain economic changes, but they leave unanswered the critical question of who's in interest. I need to just keep reading. These paragraphs suggest certain economic changes, but they leave unanswered the critical question of in whose interest is economic power to be exercised? Exactly. A question we have to ask all the time. Simple transference of business ownership into black hands, either individually or collectively, is in itself no guarantee that this will benefit the total community. Blacks are capable of exploiting one another just as easily as whites. It was this ambiguity, however, that opened the way for CORE to move toward black capitalism. What had begun as a Harlem CORE project was now shaping up as the overall strategy of National CORE. Black power was slowly but relentlessly coming to be equated with the power of black business. This despite the fact that black business had never been a powerful social entity. Most ghetto businesses tend to be marginal operations such as beauty salons, barbershops, small grocery stores, and other retail and service businesses. In 1967, 1/4 of all businesses in Harlem, for example, were Black-owned. But in all of New York City, only a dozen or so Black-owned or managed enterprises employed more than 10 people. Commenting on the plight of Black business, the Negro Handbook noted that the number of Negro-owned restaurants and other eating places, according to Department of Commerce statistics, declined by 1/3 between 1950 and 1960. Other retail outlets declined by a slightly larger percentage. In addition, the number of funeral directors dropped by 6% between 1950 and 1960. The number of barbers decreased by over 16%. And while there has been an increase in the number of Negro-owned motels and hotels, they have obviously lost a sizable portion of their most desirable clientele. In the field of cosmetic manufacture, Negro firms have lost ground, as the field has become increasingly attracted to large firms producing cosmetics for the general market. Thus, over the past decade, there has been a gradual and steady erosion of the position of Negro businesses in the community. I was going to say the way I've seen it manifest in our present times is that you'll see a Black-owned business become very popular. Let's use Shea Moisture, for example, and then it gets like bought out by, say, like a Unilever. And that happens all the time. And then what ends up happening too is that they change the recipe of the product, the chemical makeup of the product, adding very harmful chemicals that then, cause not traction, but alopecia, other forms of hair loss, and just illnesses, fibroids, all kind of things. So yeah, unfortunately, not unfortunately, but it's very accurate to say that, simply just having a Black business, it won't lead you to liberation. Oftentimes, the goal for most people, because operating a Black business is very expensive, it's hard to keep up, especially when the distribution is often not owned by Black people. So you have to go through distributors that are oftentimes racist and will practice locking Black people out or overcharging them. So then it becomes more expensive for you to run a business, say like a beauty supply store, or even just lotions and, hair products and shit like Shea Moisture. So what ends up happening is because you grow your business, you grow your clientele in hopes that you can sell it to a big white corporation that, again, once they get a hold of that and get a hold of your base that you've already established, that is loyal to the brand, like Shea Moisture did. All of a sudden, the faces on the commercial are now white. The products don't even work as well anymore because they've diluted the products either to save money or, again, they care less about that base. Since that base is Black, they'll use anything. So yeah, the history of Black business fails to disclose any significant ventures in steel, automobiles, telephone, railroads, and most other major industrial fields. The white corporate I don't know how to say that word correctly. Oligopoly? I hope I said that right. It's like oligarchy and monopoly, but in one word. and has excluded Blacks from the mainstream of American corporate endeavor, except in certain areas of banking, insurance, and publishing. But in at least two of these areas, the Black businessman is largely fighting a rearguard action. It is in the field of insurance that great inroads have been made into the Negro market by the large white corporations, which formerly shunned the Negro policyholder. Where formerly the large national companies were only willing to sell a Negro policy at higher rates or an industrial policy, the Negro consumer is now sought for ordinary insurance coverage. In 1948, the National Negro Insurance Association would claim to have 62 member companies with assets of over $180 million. As of 1963, the Negro Handbook listed 89 Black insurance firms with total assets of only $26 million. The top 10 white firms alone claim assets of over $100 billion in 1967. That's compared to the Black ones whose accumulative total was 89. Or I'm sorry, not 89, 62, there we go. Oh, I'm sorry, $108 million. So top 10 white firms assets is over $100 billion in 1963, while the top 10 Black firms would be 62. I'm sorry, I keep saying 62, 108 million. That's crazy. As for banks, in February 1969, Dempsey J. Travis, president of an association of Negro mortgage bankers, told a conference that the number of Black-owned commercial banks, for instance, had declined to 20 in 19 cities from 49 in 38 cities in 1929. At present, there is very little that would suggest any reversal of these overall trends. Moreover, in cities where a significant Black business class exists, it usually is a conservative force rather than a militant advocate of reforms. Basically, he's describing that pathway that people try to sell, you know, how they always bring up that fucking slogan that I hate, financial literacy bullshit. And Black capitalism and all the different propaganda campaigns that was created for it, it leads nowhere. It is not a viable strategy to liberation. Oftentimes not oftentimes, but the very purpose is just so that you now have a stake in this capitalist system. So then when you see like an Israel getting its ass kicked by Palestinian resistance fighters, your first, reaction is again to make the system's enemy your enemy. And now all of a sudden you're talking about how it's not your concern that a white settler state is genociding a people. And these mechanisms, like, convincing Black people they have a stake in capitalism, that they too can win, the lottery of, ascending class status and all that bullshit. And that they're just displaced millionaires. That is for a reason, and it works for the state. And we need to interrogate that on a lot more. So let's see. The proposed core program tried to reverse the generational downward trend and create new and expanded Black businesses by demanding that existing white-controlled economic enterprises be transferred to Black ownership. However, such a transfer could alter economic realities in the ghetto only if ownership and control of business activities became collective and community-wide. He's talking about like cooperatives and using like a socialist model for building on how we operate and engage in commerce. Individual ownership or limited stock corporations restrict effective control and resulting benefits to a narrowly circumscribed class of persons within the Black community. If the community as a whole is to benefit, then the community as a whole must be organized and manage collectively its internal economy and its business relationships with white America. Black business firms must be treated and operated as social property, belonging to the general Black community, not as the private property of individuals or limited groups of individuals. This necessitates the dismantling of capitalist property relations in the Black community and their replacement with a planned communal economy. But CORE had no intention of tampering with the quote-unquote free enterprise system. McKissick chose to ignore the ramifications of these considerations in his anxiety to project CORE as the most prominent and serious organization in the militant Black movement. CORE, he concluded his statement, stands ready to serve as a coordinating agent to assist all Black people of any philosophy. Subtly addressing himself to those with money to spend and who want to put out the flames in the cities, he contended that if CORE's programs were adequately funded and fully implemented, then it just might be possible to alter the future of America from its present self-destructive course. That's really important. So this McKissick said he says these things, right? And what he means is like, hey, if y'all give us money, we'll make sure these wayward Negroes will not protest. And matter of fact, we'll keep them busy with programs and propaganda and investment into black capitalism that they'll be so dizzy, drained, and the energy will be siphoned off that they won't even want to protest anymore. Basically is what he's saying. Sick shit. Several months before the July program was announced, McKissick had made clear his position on capitalism in testimony before a Senate committee. You tell us to live under the capitalist system, he said. Well, brother, give me a chance to make it in the system. Mm, 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 mm. CORE was not the only militant black group to be snared by corporate liberalism and reformism. The Newark Black Power Conference fell into the same trap. It was at this conference, held in July 1967, that the split in the Black Power movement between rebels and revolutionaries became manifest. Initial plans for the conference were made at the behest of Adam Clayton Powell, somewhat less than a year prior to its actual convening. In the fall of 1966, Powell called a Black Power planning conference at the Rayburn House Office building in Washington. He appointed a 5-man committee, which was charged with organizing the conference. Heading up the planning committee was an Episcopalian minister, Dr. Nathan Wright, who was executive director of the Department of Urban Work of the Episcopal Diocese of Newark. The conference took place only a few days after the Newark Rebellion. It was held at a white-owned hotel in downtown Newark, and a registration fee of $25 per participant was charged. Both of these facts provoked angry grumbling among some of the delegates who felt that the location selected and the fee mitigated against grassroots participation. And this, they were right. The delegates were largely middle-class blacks and professional militants. Let me read this right quick. The general text. All right, so this is a side note, and I think I want to read it. The general attack on reformism in this study is not meant to imply there is no role for reforms in the revolutionary struggle. In a struggle to transform an oppressive society, it is necessary to fight for certain reforms, but this requires that those who are oppressed are conscious or made conscious of how reforms fit into an overall strategy for social change. All too often, Black leaders hail piecemeal reforms and mindlessly advocate reformism while overlooking the fact that frequently reforms serve mainly to salvage and buttress a society which in its totality remains as exploitative as ever. So that side note is basically saying that, yes, some reforms will happen, but reforms isn't supposed to be the goal. Like that's not supposed to be that's not supposed to be our idea. There we go. Struggling. Our idea of liberation is supposed to be reform. Like reform is supposed to like give us time, like give us a chance to breathe. But in that breathing room, we're supposed to be organizing for our ultimate goal, which is destroying the system that's oppressing us. But oftentimes people present reforms like, oh yeah, if we just train police, then that will happen. Or if we get body cams on police, that's the answer. And it's like, no, we need to dismantle that. But the body cams in the meantime help us to get like, evidence, which again, do we still need evidence in this day and age? I say no, but unfortunately we have to keep reminding ourselves that, yo, this shit is real and that they are fucking killing us. So I guess that could be used for that. But again, reforms is not liberation. It's, how do they say? I guess it could be harm reduction in the way they put it. But again, harm reduction is not, the absence of revolutionary struggle. That should always be the goal. Black Power meeting was attended by some 1,300 persons from 190 organizations, 42 cities, and 39 states. The basic conclusion reached at the conference was that Black people should organize to get their fair share of the American pie, instead of trying to throw that bitch in the trash. I'm trying to say, like, it takes so much indoctrination for anyone to look at this country, this settler colonial state, this open air prison with any kind of regard or any kind of like inclination to want to salvage it. I don't want a piece of this shit pie. I want that shit to go in the trash, man. Fuck it. This is sick. It should not exist. Just like Israel shouldn't exist, there should be no United States of America. That shit should be long dismantled. It should not exist. And we need to be comfortable with understanding this should not exist. This isn't living. And we can't live under it. And we can't transform it from within. It will only swallow us whole. If this effort fails, then, according to one resolution, massive efforts would be launched to disrupt the economy. Resolutions passed dealing with economic matters included statements supporting Buy Black campaigns, neighborhood credit unions, upgrading of Black workers, establishment of a guaranteed annual income, and establishment of a Black Economic Power Fund to provide money to cooperative business ventures in Black communities. In the political sphere, the conferees voted to establish a Black Power lobby in Washington, demand the reseating of Powell, elect 12 more Black congressmen in 1968, and demand that police captains assigned to Black neighborhoods be Black. In the educational field, the conference followed the by then familiar path of calling for Black control of school boards in Black communities. Although the conference was described by the New York Times as evidencing the radicalization of the moderates, many disgruntled militant delegates felt that the meeting was all too moderate in its basic assumptions. A manual distributed by conference organizers to workshop leaders opened with the statement, "Ethnic groups in America have developed their own solidarity as a basic approach toward entry into the American mainstream." Damn, that's scathing. While not disputing the need for solidarity, one youthful delegate declared that we don't want to enter America's polluted, dirty mainstream, but to carve out an altogether new river. An older delegate said, "I don't want to be exploited by a Black man any more than I want to be exploited by a white man. You've got to change the whole system." This dispute over basic premises of the Black Power movement permeated many workshop meetings. Some delegates spoke of filling the gaps in the present system and pumping the system for all it's worth. Others denounced capitalism and urged Black people to burn it all down and create something new. I know that's fucking right. Something new was left undefined. Typical delegate attitudes were voiced in the youth workshop. "Black youth today," said a man in African garb, "can't see how they're going to get their share of the system, and so their mood is to burn it down." "I want to burn the system down," responded a young woman, "but not in such a way as to hurt Black people. I happen to think that co-ops are the best way to put a big torch to Chuck's, the white man's system. I think capitalism is the most successful system, although it's the youngest," retorted a well-dressed man. Co-ops just replace one form of bureaucracy. Co-ops just replace one form of bureaucracy with another. The Black community should get behind those Black people who have made it in the system. Oh, Lord. Another quote, "The capitalist system hasn't worked for us in the 400 years we've been under it." "Preach," answered a young delegate wearing a cap and dark glasses. "Capitalism is the most successful system of enforced exploitation in the world. I agree. It's the latest model of slavery." There's a book by Eric Williams called Capitalism and Slavery. I'll put the PDF in the Jumbotron after this if y'all want to check that out. It's a good read. "The capitalist system hasn't worked for us in the 400 years we've been under it," answered. Oh, I'm sorry, I read that. The youth workshop debate was resolved in favor of a boycott of white-owned businesses and a Buy Black campaign. The reason why it's important to read these books is because all of these things that, will have an uprising that people's like, "Hey, why don't we do this?" And to know that it's already been done and what came of it is important. And this is why political education is important, because we should already be on something new. Our strategies have to be different and revamped. So understanding, like, look, Black capitalism ends here, and here's why, and here's the people who tried it, and here's the many ways they tried it in many different areas of the United States, and it didn't work, and here's what's the results. So that's what we're reading. So the quotes I read earlier were different people giving their take at a conference on what they viewed, and as you can see, it wasn't really a consensus, which still happens today. I can't tell y'all how many cadres and Zoom meetings I be in where the basics we should grasp already, we really haven't yet, but it all takes work. We got to just keep struggling forward. The question of economic cooperatives in Black communities also came up in other workshops. A pro-co-op resolution was passed in a plenary session through several delegates expressed doubts privately as to whether Black-controlled cooperatives could seriously alleviate the economic depression of Black people in a white-dominated capitalist system. A workshop on cooperation and alliances rejected alliances with the white power structure but agreed on little else. At this historic moment, any struggles to take back some of this bread money to the African American community, I'm for, declared one workshop member. Another favored socialism. And a third argued that a fight for reform would educate Black people to the defects in the system. A brief summary of the workshop's conclusions, prepared by a militant delegate and read at the plenary sessions, called for alliances with those forces in various stages of conflict with the status quo. It was not voted upon because moderate members of the workshop rejected the summary statement as inaccurate. Some delegations voiced suspicions about the purpose of the conference. Several termed it as an operation to round up support for Powell. Others feared that an alliance of moderate leaders in the conference was trying to win control of the Black Power movement. One delegate jokingly commented that more alliances were being forged in the corridors of the conference than were being discussed in the workshop on alliances. The meeting was described by Wright in the opening session as a study conference where we can think about issues in terms of empowerment. But even this description was not accepted by all. Was this to be another conference just to allow the brothers to blow off steam? Asked a veteran of many conventions. Was this to be just another cynical attempt to obscure fundamental issues in clouds of diffuse rhetoric? A surprise resolution was introduced at the opening sessions, which called for the conference to strongly endorse the Black Revolution and all its glorious manifestations, including ghetto revolts. After a lengthy preliminary hassle, the resolution was tabled. Sorry, y'all. The conference eventually adopted a resolution supporting armed self-defense. All right, let's see where this goes. Perhaps a better understanding of what the conference was all about can be gathered from an examination of Nathan Wright's conception of Black power. Wright, a pacifist, deplores the painful excesses in the current call to the banners of Black power. In his book, Black Power and Urban Unrest, published a few days before the conference, he stated, Black power in terms of self-development means we want to fish as all Americans should do together in the mainstream of American life. That's ew. That's assimilation. That's not Black power. Like, if you understand the power is with a certain group of people, right, is in the white power structure, well, then if you want Black power, which means you want autonomy for your people, self-determination for your people, access to resources to be able to have those things that are basic human rights, housing, education, healthcare, etc., food, all of that, you know you have to take that power, not assimilate into it, because assimilating into that system means you accept your place in that system. Understanding you live under a white capitalist system means that you know that in order for the few to continually hoard resources and continue to steal resources, that means the majority of us have to be without, and we have to continue being without. And that means the more of us as time go on continue to be without, so that the pool of people disenfranchised grows while the people who have access to resource shrinks. That's the system you're assimilating into. That's no power in that. That's giving away power. That's capitulating. So it's funny he describes that as Black power, which when people say these words and use only like vague terms, a conversation, a true build, because we love to use that term, we're building. A true build would be like, what do you mean by Black power? Or what do you mean by liberation? What is revolution to you? What is liberation to you? Those conversations can go a lot further. Right, undoubtedly the most strategic, Black power in terms of self-defense development means we want to fish as all Americans do in the mainstream American life. But more specifically, Wright virtually equated Black power with Black capitalism. Sick. Undoubtedly the most strategic opportunity which our American capitalist system has to preserve or strengthen itself lies in the possibility of providing the Negro community with both a substantial and an immediate stake in its operation at every level. Where most Black leaders are fond of talking of ways of alleviating unemployment, Wright blandly accepts the necessity of chronic unemployment under capitalism. God damn. Here, y'all, I'm about to read what he says. Some economists believe that the economic system, which is traditionally in our culture, calls for a fluid reservoir of untapped resources at its base. Basically, he's admitting and knowing that economists of the capitalist system told you to your face that there will never be full unemployment. So he's accepting that. And he's saying that that actually is a need to have a bunch of people kept out of jobs and kept out of access to resources, that's necessary. I'll continue. He continues to say, if such a reservoir is needed, as many be assumed from its sustained existence, the rudimentary economic problem becomes a potentially explosive social problem when the group at the bottom is not heterogeneous, being almost entirely of one ethnic group comprising both the well-trained and some who should be there, all through social injustice. Put in plain English, what Wright is suggesting here is that rather than working to reduce or eliminate unemployment, what is really required is integration of the ranks of the unemployed. Such integration would ease the potentially explosive social problem posed by having so many blacks without jobs. So basically what he's saying, y'all, is he's like, well, yeah, okay, so you have to have people kept out of resources. They have to be kept out of jobs so that they can't afford food, housing, and live a terrible life of disenfranchisement. But here's the problem. The reason why it's going to explode in this white settler colonial state is because it's all black people. So they can organize, mix it up, put some crackers in there, some poor Asians, mix it up. And that way, not only will it be hard for them to organize and, to be able to identify like this is a racist white system, because how can it be racist when there's poor whites? And we've heard that before. Or how can it be a white supremacist system when there's poor Asians? Like if it was a truly white supremacist system, only black people would suffer. You've heard that before, but that's literally because that's on purpose to create the illusion that, oh no, actually injustice is fair. Everyone's being fucked over. And it's like not in the same way and not for the same outcome. And we have to approach it in a very realistic and objective way in order to like accurately describe what's happening here. But again, that confusion is orchestrated for a reason. Says, as for those who already enjoy economic security and power, Wright's version of Black power can also be helpful. The cooperative efforts of Black and white executives for the sake of sharing power to increase power and benefits can be one of the most creative thrusts in this sphere. Again, for the good of the nation and individual self-interest. White's approval of this Black and white together, in quotes, scramble for corporate power and individual investment represents a betrayal of the Black liberation struggle. Not only is he an apologist for corporate capitalism and its depredation of the working population and poor, but he advances also as an implicitly positive value one of its prominent ideological features, one that is particularly destructive of concern for social welfare, selfish individualism. In this respect, Wright is like the native intellectual in a colony country who cannot relinquish Western values, including individualism, which he has been taught by his colonial masters. As Fanon argued, in a serious liberation struggle aimed at creating a new society, individualism should be among the first of the old habits to disappear. The quote goes, the native intellectual had learnt from his masters that the individual ought to express himself fully. The colonialist bourgeois had hammered into the native's mind the idea of a society of individuals where each person shuts himself up in his own subjectivity and whose only wealth is individual thought. Now the native who has the opportunity to return to the people during the struggle for freedom will discover the falseness of this theory. The very forms of organization of the struggle will suggest to him a different vocabulary. Brother, sister, friend, these are words outlawed by the colonialist bourgeois. Because of them, my brother is my purse, my friend is part of my scheme for getting on. The native intellectual takes part in a sort of auto-da-fe, I'm sorry if I said that wrong, in the destruction of all his idols, egoism, recrimination that springs from pride, and the childish stupidity of those who always want to have the last word. Such a colonized intellectual, dusted over by colonial culture, will in the same way discover the substance of the village assemblies, the cohesion of people's communities, and the extraordinary fruitlessness of local meetings and groupments. Henceforth, the interest of one will be the interest of all, for in concrete fact, everyone will be discovered by the troops, everyone will be massacred, or everyone will be saved. The motto, look out for yourself, the atheist method of salvation, is, in this context, forbidden. Actually, the connection between the Black Power Conference and corporate capitalism was more than merely ideological. After the conference ended, Wright revealed that it was particularly financed by some 50 American corporations, which, Wright said, were not pressured into contributing. In explaining why these white-controlled companies would pay for a Black Power meeting, Wright simply referred to his definition of Black power as meaning self-development by powerless Blacks. By the time of the Philadelphia Black Power Conference the following year, there was no longer even the slightest effort to conceal that this meeting was partly a front for channeling Black militancy into the arms of the corporate capitalists. For example, the invitation to the meeting was sent out on Carol Co. letterhead stationery and was signed by Benjamin Wright, market development manager for Carol. Benjamin Wright also happens to be the brother of Nathan Wright. Enclosed with the invitation was a copy of a speech given by the president of Carol in June 1968. The Carol chief told his audience that at first the term Black Power, very frankly, filled me with dread. But this was no longer the case now that he understood Black Power to mean equity and empowerment. That is, ownership of apartments, ownership of homes, ownership of businesses, as well as equitable treatment for all people. The corporation president announced that the business now recognizes that by actively attacking the human and economic waste represented by ghettos, we can increase our gross national product by a solid 10% within 3 years. This is obviously good news for business. Ghetto reconstruction offers the prospect of becoming a new vehicle for corporate growth and expansion. Ghetto residents should welcome this corporate invasion, according to the Claro man, because only business can create the economic viability for equity. And only the businessman can make equity an acceptable and social pattern in this country. The message to the audience was clear. Forget Black militancy and all this foolish talk of revolution. Rely on the American businessman, for it is only he who has the power and now the will to promote Black self-development. Of course, a fair rate of return must be guaranteed for the businessman's investment of time and resources in the ghetto, but then a national government which has seen its anti-poverty programs flop and watched cities go up in flames will be only too happy to underwrite this new and promising venture in ghetto pacification. Some interesting shit, man. I'm gonna stop right here because that's about an hour. But basically, he's painting a picture for you about what happens when those who position themselves as leaders or talking heads in resistance movements or in times of resistance, whether they're directly involved or not, when you find those individuals who constantly want to be in front of the camera, who constantly want to be the only one talking, like I said, they can spew the rhetoric, but if their goals and their, intentions is not just to assimilate, but, to use the collective discontent of the people to market it off to corporations and businesses and, the state as a way of, look, I can control these people. They will listen to me. So how much are you willing to pay for that? Like, you don't want these people to keep, boycotting your stores. Well, I can tell them that we don't need to do it. And I can create, programs that will distract them from doing it. How much will you pay me for that? And unfortunately, people literally do that. Like, they create whole careers out of, like, quote unquote activism. But there's real consequences. And of course, the one consequence I'm, going to bring up is it literally sells out the people and it's a direct threat to liberation and revolution. So, yeah, people who use the suffering of Black people and try to auction it off to the highest bidder of corporate white America, again, those are traitors and they're state collaborators and they're very dangerous. And it's okay to look at them as such and to call it as such. But so I'll end here. Um, Sorry for it being so quick, but oh, there's a request. My bad, Beck. I ain't see it. Hold on. Let me see. Let me know if you got the mic. What's up, Beck?
Oh, hey. Sorry, man. I was talking to my neighbor. Um, I realized I put myself on the speaker thing, but I don't think this is like a discussion, was it?
Yeah, go ahead. What's up?
Oh, okay. Bye. I'll see you later. You can stop by whenever you want. I'll be at the house. Um, what I was saying is that damn, I'm not gonna lie, bro. I just brought my dog in the house. So like, can you give me a few minutes to collect myself?
Nah, you good. You good. Don't worry about it.
Oh, wait, wait, wait,
But
wait.
yeah, go ahead.
I got it. It came back. I was wanting to talk about how so this past weekend I had went to a national convention for a socialist, international socialist organization that I am a member, a dues-paying member in. And it was very interesting because there was a lot of discussion on the Israel-Palestinian war that's going on. And let's just say that I feel like it's really easy for us to speak on these war issues from like a Western, this is like a quote unquote international organization, right? But everybody that was represented there came from a Western country and trying to put their own opinion on revolution. Like, okay, we disavow Hamas, but I mean, we support the Palestinian people for and their right for sovereignty and stuff, but we disavow Hamas and what they're doing. Like, they basically said we want revolution, but this is not the right way. I'm like, okay, so what's your solution? Like, I feel like any type of support for Israel or condemning of Hamas by and large is like some coon behavior. But I was scared to say stuff because like this particular convention was in Chicago, and this weekend a little boy, Palestinian boy, was killed in Chicago that same weekend. Just walking, or no, it was by his landlord. Can you imagine your landlord killing you? Like, what the fuck? But yeah, there's a lot of double talk coming out of the left right now. Um, what I have found is that mostly Black left organizations are in full support of Hamas, and so am I. But it's like the white left is showing, and it's crazy because there was somebody who's not like on the executive board, I don't think, but a member, dues paying member like myself, who spoke at the convention and said like they were like, okay, so if you support Hamas and their attacks right now, what about us? And I was thinking, yeah, what about us? Finish that statement. Like I was like, we're also in like a settler colonial state. Like, okay, so I mean, that was a good question to ask because I could see the gears turning in people's heads. Like, okay, so these Israelis are settler colonialists and they're being pushed out of their stolen land, yada yada. There's such a parallel to be made here to that I find it really is like you said, it's painting a picture as to if a revolution were to occur here, who would be on whose side, because what is happening to the Palestinians, or what has been happening, is the same thing that happened to the Black Americans here and the natives. And I'm taking notes mentally of people's response for future reference. Let's just say that.
No, I'm glad you brought that up because I was actually talking to Choose, I think, a couple days ago, and I was telling her about how these meetings I've been going to specifically about what's going on in Israel, and how, like you said, there's this, like, everyone is co-signing right now the ceasefire. They're like, oh, let's ask for a ceasefire. Like, the fear of revolution and going against the state, especially a global superpower, is like shaking everyone on the left right now.
And
And that
they're like, okay, so if they don't do the ceasefire, they're gonna die. I'm like, but like personally, for me, I get where people are coming from. Oh, we should do a ceasefire because they were thinking, oh, the Israeli people backed by the U.S. government, it would be an ethnic cleansing. They like the population would be gone. But my thing is, personally, for me, why are you even supporting a ceasefire? You should go further and be like, yo, there needs to be land back. And not just a ceasefire. And if the Palestinians are willing to fight for that, then you should let them fight for that, and we should support them. Because why would it's easy for you to say, oh, we need to stop, just everything was better before this war, but like when you are living in apartheid, I'm sure anything else is better than the apartheid. It kind of
and
reminds.
I would
Go ahead.
I will back that up real quick. It's like, so the thing is that, yeah, so the temperature that you're feeling and with the groups you deal with is literally the same, my same experience, to be honest with you. Like, but in, like you said, I'm taking notes. And the reason why I'm taking notes is because the uprisings we don't hear about, who don't get front attention, would be like, the uprisings going on in Haiti. Like, I don't hear many leftists discussing that and showing allegiance to that. The uprisings that are going on across the continent, we actually have people hold spaces talking about they shouldn't be doing it and why they can't and why it's not legitimate. And we watch that happen in real time. Now, those same people will not do that when it comes to Palestine, because there are certain movements that you will get ousted if you try that crazy shit with certain groups. But Black people's resistance, that's fair ground. We can dismiss that all day. So the reason why I'm also taking note is because when those Black people in the global South, decide for armed struggle and guerrilla warfare, I know how we see how people are going to react. You know, when the state, who has the power to deem who's criminal and who's not, right? Deem who's good and who's bad, we know that people are just going to fall in line with the state. And why is that, right? It's because people, in signs of, especially with oppressive power, they would either choose to run, to flee, or to capitulate, or they'll choose to fight. And the thing is that fighting takes shape in many forms. All of it is a direct threat to power, and we have to grapple with that. Like, if you could say, yeah, I choose to fight, I'm going to send money to Palestinians. Well, guess what? This, to the state, that's violent, and you are a terrorist. So we can't allow anyone to be called a terrorist that is fighting for resistance, and we got to stop being so comfortable with that. So this whole thing about, oh, I support Palestinians' resistance, but I don't agree with Hamas. That already tells me where you're at. You haven't done the work and analysis, because you're already on the wrong foot. Like, what are you going to say? Oh, I support Black people being free, but that whole revolution and guerrilla warfare, I don't know about that. Is there a better way? Can they just do a Millie Rock or
Their
something?
argument
Like
wasn't
that
even
shit.
about the guerrilla warfare. Their argument was like, okay, Hamas, yes, they're fighting a resistance, right? They're doing resistance actions right now, but they have
She cut out for me. I
reactionary.
don't know if y'all can still hear.
Sorry, my brother called me. I'm gonna call him back real quick. But they were talking about like, oh, they're doing this in a reactionary way. Look at Hamas politics outside of this revolution. Like they're conservative, anti, or not feminist, all this extra stuff. I'm like, okay, we can disagree on their politics, but on the premise, like right now, they're fighting against a settler colonial state, and in my opinion, it's not the time to pick apart their movement because it kind of weakens them as far as the PR
Here's
wise.
my thing with that, real quick before you move on, Beck. That right there, when people start bringing up, well, actually, they have this going on. They're anti-Black, they're misogynist and all that. I mean, Israel literally, sterilizes its Black citizens. Like, we can point to all in the ways in which they oppress LGBTQIA Israeli citizens. Like, we can point to the many human rights violations that Israel's done. But here's my thing, is that when all of a sudden you bring that out in times of resistance, I'm looking at you sideways, because we read about that in the book, how people will co-opt languages and rhetoric as well as analysis from people whose mind is for liberation and revolution, only for the express purpose to help the state. And that means that those of us who want liberation, we have to be just on our 10. We literally have to be sharp to be able to navigate that. And that doesn't mean dismissing these claims. That doesn't mean, like, ignoring it. That means understanding what autonomy and self-determination looks like. If you believe in the autonomy and self-determination of the Palestinian people or any people fighting resistance, you have to understand they already have resistance groups that are addressing those concerns on the ground too. Anti-Blackness, there are Black Palestinians that literally have whole frameworks of resistance addressing that in their community, and have the actual tangible works and programs in which they implement it on the ground to address anti-Blackness in their community. But in order for you to even imagine that already happening without approaching this in like some kind of paternalistic sense, like, oh, did you know there's anti-Blackness there, little Palestinian? Yes, they know that on the ground. Yes, they're aware of their material conditions. Yes, the people have organized against it. But again, when we sit there and we don't want to give people their autonomy and see them as whole human beings capable of analyzing their material conditions and creating the strategies for themselves to address these, well, then we'll buy into that faux rhetoric and fake concern and fake outrage for the marginalized groups when it wasn't there before. I want to go to the hands real quick. Thank you, Beck. I want to keep this. I can talk to you all day, girl. We be going. But Shaquille and then Maze.
Hey, so I was just jumping in on what the sister was talking about with the young Palestinian kid that was stabbed 26 times. We gotta detail it the way it is, just to kind of just put out what the atrocities were, because I believe the mother is also in critical condition, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if she made it or whatever the case may be, but
Yeah, he
this
stabbed
thing with,
the mom
God, I'm sorry.
first. The landlord stabbed the mom first. I think the mom was trying to hide her child. Um, yo, this is a really sad story, but the child just succumbed from his wounds before or as soon as he reached the hospital. Um, yeah, so I was just like saying that for clarification.
That shit, and part of my language, y'all, that shit is fucking just diabolical. Like a baby, man, 6 years old. And it hit my heart because I got a 5-year-old niece, actually, and I'm just thinking, what would it be like for me in that situation? Even when we talk about the whole issue with Hamas, people that they don't bring up that Hamas didn't exist until 1987. occupation of Palestine started long before that. How did we get to a Hamas? If they're not if they're not willing to talk about the whole thing and they're just gonna leave parts out and it's gonna be activism by omission, then it's BS. Even with the white leftists that you've had to deal with, they could drop the leftist ideology. They still get an opportunity to be white, while everybody else has to deal with oppression, while everybody else gets to be, it basically when Fanon says the wretched of the earth. Like what are we gonna do? When it's by having these spaces that these sisters are so graciously opened up. Yeah, and just even without Hamas, right? The occupation or the seeds were planted in 1917. If you look at the Balfour Declaration, if and then in 1922, it is a mandate for Palestine saying that they're going to set up an Israeli state. 1948 is when it got established, but long before that, they had already put it in motion. So kind of just, they already were like okay with these folks not having a place of their own. On a fundamental level, anybody that thinks that Hamas's reaction or that Palestinian reaction to over 75, over 100 years, over 100 years of occupation, that there's a wrong way to do it. What's the correct way? If anybody walked into your house right now and said, you stay in a room, I'm going to take all the rest of your shit, what's going to be their reaction to that? Like it's mind-boggling that people would even see or try to both sides this situation. There is no both sides. These people have been getting stepped on. These people have been getting murdered. These people have been getting, it's been a genocidal occupation longer than a lot of us have been alive.
No,
Myself included.
I feel you. Y'all brought up that story, and I'm so glad y'all did, because not only was the landlord like familiar with the family, but he built a tree house for that kid. So there was like ties. That kid looked up to him, and that's important because, again, babe, I was just talking about 9/11 the other day and how the switch happened between, like, it was literally one day you could cut on a TV and see people make fun of the president, and that was all part of late night television, to like literally 9/12, where people were getting like their doors kicked in for even like chuckling about a joke about a president on the internet. Like it changed so fast. And the reason why I bring that up and trying to draw that parallel is because this guy, he literally said that he was watching the news and hearing and what happened in Palestine, but of course from, a white seller colonial media platform telling him like Israel's being attacked and they need to defend themselves and Hamas is coming for you and raping babies and cutting off babies' heads, all kind of bio-racist coded propaganda shit, right? And he said he was so moved that he needed to kill a Palestinian now. A kid he just had built a treehouse for, a kid that they've been over to their house for dinner and shit. He needed to kill that kid immediately because he saw it as one less Palestinian. And how easy it is to like see people radicalized and flipped by the state. And that happens a lot. I mean, we seen it during the uprisings when people started wearing those Blue Lives Matter flags and shit, how people started deputizing themselves. The more they saw Black people trending for resisting police brutality, you saw white people then go out and commit more atrocities of killing Black people for anything like they already doing, but the uptick surged. So again, we have to study these things in a way and draw the parallels to our oppression. Like, Palestine isn't the first state that the white system has tried to, oppress and to annihilate. We can draw the parallels with ourselves as Black people anywhere we find ourselves in the world. But the thing is that our particular situation that we find ourselves in is that we understand that not only will our story not be told accurately, but it will be co-opted and flipped to where even our neighbors and our family members will see those, even if it's you who's a resistance, someone who's for Black liberation, will see you as a terrorist and will see you as a liability because they want to resist state oppression. These things we have to start grappling with, because where we find ourselves, and I'll go to the hands after this, is that shit would only continue to get worse where we're at. The way I see Palestine, right? And I got this again, chopping up and politicking with Jews, right? We were talking about how Israel is like a modern state, right? We're used to seeing this kind of genocidal shit against like Black people all across the global South for centuries, right? And they were designated so-called third world. So we became accustomed and it's normalized. So when we see hospitals getting bombed in the Congo, or when we see babies being slaughtered in a village in Uganda, we're like, oh yeah, well, that's the continent. We brush that off collectively, and we don't see that as, we don't see like the trending topics like that for us as Black people. Now the thing is that in Palestine, with this happening, this genocide happening, we're seeing that the colonial state, I believe we're going to see like a shift in how it operates. Like there's no more like we need to be polite. If you want to be a racist and a fascist, say please first. It's no more of that. They see that they were able to create a white settler colonial state in modern times that was so egregious, where you can go right now on the timeline, look up Abby Martin and look at the videos of her interviewing people in Israel, and they'll tell you about how they need to carpet bomb Muslims right now, how they need to annihilate them in their seed and in their bloodline. And these are everyday people baking bread, eating chips, all of that. They made that a normal way of existing. So to me, we need to study that too, and to see like, yo, the white settler colonial state isn't going to function how it now functions. No, it doesn't need to. It has a temperature check. We are watching in the palm of our hands, like we're watching a fucking Netflix special of people getting wiped off the face of the earth. I've seen more dismembered limbs of children in 1 week than I've ever seen in my life, and it's becoming normal. And I hit retweet or heart it. Like, understand what that does to us as a collective, and understand that is their way of conditioning us and creating consent for that colonial state of Israel, the way it exists in its genocidal, omnicidal nature, for that to be all of our norms within the in a colonial state. That shit we need to be afraid of and be prepared for. But my bad. I'll be going off. The next person is Maze, and then yours truly. Oh, Shaquille, my bad. Shaquille, were you finished, bro?
It's all good. You raised a bunch of valid points. I was just gonna let you keep going. You said you'd be going off, but you doing everything the right way. You just raised a few points that I would have raised, even with drawing parallels, right? What's the difference between bombing the hospital or bombing churches in Alabama long before we existed? Like, these are things that have already happened to Black people, and then there's this cognitive dissonance without people sometimes, where it's like, yo, them bombing hospitals where you should have a place to go and be safe is no different from them bombing churches, or even few couple years back, them going and doing a mass shooting in a damn grocery store in Buffalo. If you can't go and shop for groceries, if you can't go to school, if you like, let's just call it what it is. Our, solidarity has to be with not just oppressed people that look like us, but all oppressed people. There's no such thing as half-ass solidarity. Let's just, you can't scream freedom with somebody with your foot on somebody else's neck.
Yo, real talk. And you know what it is I think people misunderstand the strategy of solidarity. They think like, oh, you like me and I like you and we're besties. No. The thing is that anytime the white settler colonial state gains ground anywhere, that is a direct threat to our liberation as Black people. I cannot have the white settler colonial state be able to cement Israel and wipe off Palestinians from the map. I can't have that, because now Africa is directly in danger from where it's at. And then the white settler state can gain resources through stealing oil in the Middle East if it positions itself through Israel. That is a problem. That's what I'm talking about when we think about our
And
strategy and what our liberation look like.
the white people think the same way though. You're so right. We need to start thinking like them, but not in like a, oh, we need to do what white people do, but I'm talking about a strategy. The reason the US is in Israel right now is not because they give a fuck about the Israelis or some Christian, right to the land, the Holy Land. It's because Israel for themselves gives them a strategic position in the Middle East, so where they can like exude their dominance and their quote unquote democracy. They need Israel because they're the only people who are pro US within the Middle East. Like, and when it's weird because Black countries, they won't act the same. I haven't heard a single Black African, as in Black African, not like North African, Black African country come out in support of the Palestinians. Why? Like, why are y'all being quiet? Oh, we don't want to disturb, we don't want to anger the bear, but that's how they play, bro. The US will go into beefs that have nothing to fuck to do with them because they realize that if they let uh, a southern power or a non-western power win in a certain field, well, okay, that's goes against their dominance. we need to think the same way. Like I might even know no niggas in Palestine, bro, but I know if the United States keeps Israel as a state for them, that's not going to work for me. Plus, I'm an American, so my tax dollars are going to these bombs too. So that's something we need to think about. Like we need to play the game just like them. Okay, it's so sad. Oh my God, the Israeli children are dying. That's really sad. But you know how many Palestinians died in the past like 16, 15 years? Like, okay, people die in war. That's what happens. But we need to start like, I don't want to say tighten your bootstraps, but you tighten them bootstraps, bro. Stop licking ass.
Right.
Shit.
And like you said, be strategic. But my bad, y'all. I'm gonna let the hands go because I mean we're cooking, but let me let Maze go. Homegirl's been waiting a minute, and then yours truly.
Yeah, I wanted to listening to the discussion, and I wanted to point out, yeah, they say, oh, the way that it's being gone about, the outrage, the demands for humanity to be recognized need to be. There's a better way to do it. Well, the Palestinian people had representatives. The Palestinian people had people who were willing to sit down and talk with the Israeli government and the Israeli officials and have their needs met and addressed. And what did the Israelis? They killed them. How am I to advocate in ways that you say are conforming to the social norms and you kill my voice by killing my leadership that represent me in your forum? How am I supposed what else are you leaving these people with but God, rocks, and stones? Stones. That's what you have. Do what you, and now they want to look at, well, this rocket seems to be, it came from this country but it was used by this group. Hello, you're going to use what you can use to defend yourself. These people are fighting for their lives. It's not a comfortable fight where you slap him and he slaps that one. No, it's do the best, biting, kicking, clawing, screaming, poison, everything you can get your hands on. And that's been done to these people for decades.
No
But
word.
nobody paid attention to it. Nobody, it was quietly kept because cameras aren't allowed over there. Be wary of where they don't want cameras. Be wary where there's no reporters that can go in or what these reporters come out and get to say is siphoned through 6 or 7 people and has to be sanctioned. Bibi built this, and for him, and what pisses me off, Bibi helped build Hamas back when he thought he could control the Palestinian people. And he's getting a pat on the back and a check to now kill these people. But he helped build Hamas. And who helped build Bibi? The Republicans. It all comes back here. It all comes back here. And for the funk to get spread all over the world. And then it frustrates me to sit back and look at Black people and say, even if you don't know the history, these people are being oppressed. How can you not relate to that? Well, this person died. Well, they're killing them. Hello, they're killing us too. How do
And
you not see how do you not have that correlate for you? I can't. How do you not understand that?
yo,
I'm
Maze, real
sorry.
quick too. My thing is too is like not only like what you name, just the inhumane response of saying, "Oh, that's not my problem," but we understand that's cowardice because most people who do say that or who ask, "Well, what have they done for Black people?" You'd be like, "What have you done? Have you participated in any way in Black liberation struggles in America?" No, but it's usually just out of fear and cowardice. Like if someone gives them a line to say that can help them avoid actually taking a stand, a principle stand, most people will take it and they'll just repeat it as though they just ate that. And we see it all the fucking time. But I also wanted to say too, like more than just people like relating and understanding and sympathizing with the people going through a genocide, I need them also to understand like how Beck and Shaquille and you touched on strategy. Like if you're against Cop City, if you want to be able to say like, look, I see what's happening and why they're building cop cities. I see as the conditions, material conditions gets worse, they know there's going to be repression, there's going to be uprising and revolts and resistance groups, and there's going to be looting. So guess what? We need cop cities across the country to be able to respond and repress as soon as possible. A police state, right? So if we are against that, if we want to be able to farm our resistance and we want our revolution to be sustainable and accurate and successful, we have to understand that Israel can exist, because guess where the police get trained at? In fucking Israel. So that's what we're talking about. Like, these having a view of saying like, oh, my people over here in America, another plantation, aren't affected. You're not looking at where we are currently. This is not a localized problem. White supremacy is about world domination. White hegemony is about having world power. So guess what? Your freedom has